Look at that, right on time. We have an on-time departure today, 10 a.m. Saturday, AirVenture 2024. Who's been here all week? All right. We're both, hitting that point where it's been awesome, and it's still awesome, but that fatigue level is creeping in for all of us. Who flew in from out of town? Good. I guess kind of we all did. I didn't actually fly, but those of you who flew in, that's a bucket list item for me. So today, my name is Ryan Bolander. My role I've been at ForeFlight 3 years. My role at ForeFlight is I'm the account executive education, which means I'm responsible for all of our flight school, student pilot, flying club relationships. And right now we have over 250 flight schools that we formally partner with. And then the schools that we don't formally partner with, we hear that they're using ForeFlight anyway. So that's super exciting that we have really widespread domestic and even beginning to be international adoption for ForeFlight. A little bit more about me. I live in Chandler, Arizona. Anybody from Arizona or even Chandler? All right, usually there's a few. Chandler, Arizona, if you guys think it's hot here today, or if you think it's been hot this week, we've had temperatures of over 110 every day for weeks on end. And while I'm almost a native to Arizona, that has been something that is just, that's wearing on us. So I'm happy to be here to get out of the heat. Wreaks havoc on the airplanes too. They don't fly as well. I'm in the Southwest practice area, is an area south of Phoenix where there's about 15 major flight schools in the area. So if you're flying through south of the Bravo of Arizona, you're going to have a lot of flight school traffic, which is super exciting, but also something to be aware of. One thing that, it says 225, we're up to 250 flight schools now. My favorite aviation movie, and this is kind of what got me started into aviation in the early 80s, is The Right Stuff. Who's seen The Right Stuff? There's some hands. The AirVenture crowd has always seen The Right Stuff. Just an amazing, anytime I need to go back and be inspired, I go back and watch that movie and see how legends in aviation kind of paved the way for pilots such as myself. I've only been flying 7 years, which means that I'm probably outranked in that regard by probably everybody in here. But I've been fortunate enough to make a career change, become a CFI. I do some instruction on the side. I'm working on my double I, and ForeFlight has been with me even before I was an employee. And I'm truly, truly humbled to be working with ForeFlight. If those of you who have not been over to the Boeing Pavilion yet and have met our team, we bring our developers and we bring our pilot support staff and we bring our employees who are pilots and who work on the app daily. We're incredibly passionate. We pride ourselves on our support. And so we really appreciate those of you who are using ForeFlight as well. So great, really appreciate being here, and let's dive in. The angle of this presentation, we're going to cover what's new and a number of things, but what we're really going to talk about is how to use ForeFlight if you're a CFI, or how to train with ForeFlight. But even if you're not a CFI, you're not flight training, there's going to be a lot of stuff in here that really should be useful to you. So we're going to talk about what's new with ForeFlight. We're going to cover some of that. It's always exciting stuff. We're going to discuss the legality of using ForeFlight as an EFB. As an instructor, I often get questions about how does the FAA feel about ForeFlight, or what is their stance? Well, they issued an advisory circular, which we'll just touch on briefly, that kind of discusses how an EFB is viewed by the FAA. And then finally, we'll roll into a lot of tips, tricks, and best practices when it comes to using ForeFlight as a flight training device. All right, and without further ado, teaching and learning with ForeFlight. So, what's new? One of the things that you may have used, first of all, I should ask, who subscribes to ForeFlight, who uses it? Oh, good, just about almost everybody, a few people that don't. A lot of you may have realized or recognized that we've had controlled airspace alerts recently, a wonderful, wonderful feature that provides just additional situational awareness. If you're flying along and you have this feature turned on, we are going to alert you when you're approaching a Bravo airspace, for example. We'll even alert you again when you enter it. So hopefully that was the plan. But if you're not planning on flying into a Bravo, or you don't have clearance, we're going to give you some great information. We're going to provide you with an alert so you can steer clear. And I know by my own personal flying in the Southwest practice area, we're always training underneath the Bravo shelf. And if you're focusing on your instruction and not paying attention, it's very easy to come a little close when you're training. Another thing we have now is printable binders. This is a photo that's been wandering around ForeFlight kind of for many, many years. This is a typical student pilot in the past with all the different information that they might need. And most of you remember that when you began your flight training, you had stacks and stacks of paper resources. The challenge with these paper resources is that they're constantly going out of date. And so you had to get new paper resources. And then if you were like me when I began, I would sometimes keep the old paper and suddenly you're wrapping Christmas presents in sectional charts. But one thing we have now is a way to consolidate everything within an EFB, which is super great. And then also we have the ability now to go into your documents tab, and now you can create sets of documents. And if you need to print them, you can. Sometimes it's appropriate to have something paper in the cockpit. We'll talk a little bit about later about how to have contingencies for your iPad when you're flying, and having your flight plan on paper is just the ultimate backup to an EFB failure. Here again is how you can print it out. You can just string approach plates, like if you're flying into a certain airport, you can have the airport diagram, you can have the approach plates, you can have your flight plan, you can have the AFD page all sort of linked together. Super helpful. Another feature that we recently released is searchable airport NOTAMs. Of course, we know that NOTAMs are challenging just because they can be extremely long and cryptic, albeit very important. Well, now what we can do is you can go into the airport tab on your ForeFlight airport page, and you can actually search for different information about the runways that you might be using. In this case, we're searching runway 5 because we know we're headed that direction, and of course, we got the NOTAMs for runway 5 that come up immediately. So if you need to really hone in on a very specific area of your flight, you can search for that nav, that airport right there within ForeFlight in the NOTAMs. All right. One of the things we're really, really proud about recently is ForeFlight we started here in the States, in Houston and Austin, but we're really becoming a global company. We just moved into Australia, and we're extremely excited about that partnership. I work with flight schools, and we were working with one of the major flight schools in Australia, Sydney Flying College, who we look to partner with very, very soon. So we're super excited about ForeFlight. It looks just as awesome in Australia here. So just something that where Boeing has helped invest us and grow us into being a global EFB. And ultimately, it just means we'll be using ForeFlight for years to come. Another thing that we've done recently within ForeFlight, this is great for for visual students who are learning their private. If you look at a VFR sectional, it's going to have visual reporting points. We've now digitized them, so if you turned off the map layer, those reporting points would still show up. These are great to have on your map. You can navigate to them. And so if you're approaching visually an airport, the visual reporting points that are noticed by, that are recognized by ATC are right there within ForeFlight. When I was a new student pilot, I also golf a little bit, being in Arizona. And there was a golf course right below me, and I knew exactly what golf course that was, and exactly I was right over it. So I announced proudly to ATC that I'm directly over Southern Dunes Golf Course. And they said, we have no idea where that is. So unfortunately, they weren't golfers, but at the same time, if I had this feature up, I would know that I could not report on Southern Dunes Golf Course. I would need to report on Gila Memorial, which is definitely on the map. Ownership colors. We love blue at ForeFlight. That's kind of been our bread and butter color, but now we allow you to go into the settings. You can change the ownership color to any color you want. And those of you also figured out how to change your aircraft from our stock ownership aircraft icon to any sort of fighter or the type of airplane that you probably fly. So super fun little feature to continue to allow us to be customized to your liking. Another customer request that we received is the need to filter out runway links that are too small for your aircraft. So a lot of, for my sake, I fly single engine pistons. I can almost land anywhere, but if you fly something a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, we have the way to go into ForeFlight and actually take the airports, put in a minimum runway length, and that will actually filter out. So you're going from a number of airports, filtering down to less. So a great way to really, really understand exactly and know which airports are available to you that will be charted. We also have the ability to make comments right within ForeFlight. A lot of you who are general aviation pilots who are headed toward a certain airport, it's good to know what the comments that other pilots are making. You can go right into ForeFlight and you can make comments directly within the airport tab. On the upper right, there's a comments button, and then you can go through and read reviews on the airport, potentially things like the type of fuel available, comments from reviews on the FBO, possibly information about the food that's being served at the local cafe. It's a great way that we are kind of building a community feel of ForeFlight. And speaking of community, that's something that we're looking more. So as you continue to use ForeFlight, we're looking for ways to build community among our pilots and providing them great information to connect. For those of you who have a Sentry device, we also have ADSB traffic breadcrumbs. That's a way to see what the breadcrumbs of other traffic in the area. For example, if you have that feature pulled up, and you can toggle that feature on in our settings, you can now see that other traffic is what they're doing. So for example, if you're flying into an airport and you look at the other traffic and they've got their breadcrumbs showing traffic patterns, that can give you a really good idea of what other traffic is doing, and that you'd have to work your way into a busy training airport. Another really neat feature that we have, especially if you're traveling internationally, is our day-night overlay. It's just a really good way to zoom out and then just see where daytime, nighttime is in a really, really kind of graphical way. Another wonderful feature that you probably have seen at some point if you're flying in a busy airport is traffic on runway alerts. If you have this feature turned on, if you're flying into an airport and there's noticed or detected traffic, we're going to let you know. And as a student pilot, that's really good because obviously sometimes if you're flying into the sun, it can be very difficult visually to see exactly what's ahead of you. So to have traffic on runway alerts is super, super valuable and something that we're really proud to provide. For those of you who have Apple Watches, this was again customer feedback. We have had a wonderful partnership with Apple for many, many years to develop ForeFlight in the way that you've come to enjoy it. We recently released, I guess almost about a year ago, for Apple Watch. So you can go in, you can download, there's some syncing. Obviously you won't be able to do the extensive features that you would on your iPad. And obviously a watch is not designed for that. But if you need things like weather, VFR conditions, information about airports, there's a lot of different widgets that you can use when you're on your Apple Watch. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. That's what's new. And of course, there's a whole lot more that's new as well. I'm just kind of highlighting on some features. Something that just was released was reported turbulence. If you use a Sentry device, you can now connect to that feature and really see where Sentry units as a network among all pilots are reporting turbulence. It's a great way to, again, have an idea of what you're doing in ways that it's never been available to pilots before technologically. All right, so what does the FAA say about iPads and EFBs? So primarily, FAA released Advisory Circular 9178. It was recently updated to 9178 Alpha, and I know it's a little bit hard to read, but basically they recognize an electronic flight bag as an electronic display intended primarily for flight deck or cabin use. They can provide a variety of aviation data from checklists, navigation charts, a pilot operating handbook, or perform basic calculations such as performance calculations and fuel calculations. So what's great is this is exactly what ForeFlight does. It provides information in a format that can be useful in the cockpit, and the FAA recognizes it as a viable resource for pilots. So some things that the FAA requires from ForeFlight or from EFBs. The advisory circular states that EFBs can be used during all phases of flight operations in lieu of paper engine starts up outside, your EFB can be used in lieu of paper reference material if, so these ifs are pretty important. The information is the functional equivalent of the paper reference material. So for example, in ForeFlight, we're pulling in the exact updated VFR sectional. We're pulling in updated approach plates. So we are providing the functional equivalent of what the FAA requires. Another requirement is that the EFB does not replace or interfere with any system or equipment required by Part 91. So again, your EFB is going to be a standalone system and not interfering with anything that you're required to be using. And again, it makes sense that the information used for navigation or performance planning is current and up to date. So really, ForeFlight receives flying marks from the FAA in terms of being used. We handle all of these different criteria required by the FAA. So when you fly with ForeFlight, feel comfortable that the FAA endorses the manner and format in which we are presenting information. So the FAA goes a little bit further, which I think is incredibly helpful. They provide some key implementation considerations. And these are not necessarily requirements, but there's some great tips that's provided by the FAA in terms of using your EFB. One of the main requirements is that anybody who's using an EFB should assess the human-machine interface when using the EFB. So think critically exactly how you're going to be interacting with your iPad while you fly. And then they bring up some really important considerations: display and lighting issues. I know that sometimes we have a night mode that allows you to see the EFB better at night. There's issues for dimming. Understand how your iPad works so you can make the display brighter or dim when you're flying at night. So again, important consideration. Take in mind EFB shutdown and failure considerations. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but really treat your EFB like a system on your aircraft and what to do and train for if you have an EFB failure. I know in Arizona, I have been waiting to take off. My iPad has been on the dash and the heat has turned off my iPad. And just like that, I've got to make sure I've got my backup phone ready or paper charts or something. But I'm trained for that. I understand how that works. And I also make sure I keep my iPad out of the sun as much as I can. It also talks about the importance of stowing your iPad during takeoff and landing. I've seen students that have their iPad on their lap, and when they're ready to rotate, the yoke is banging against that iPad on their lap. That is something that it can be a huge safety of flight issue and something that can be trained for. Another thing to manage is the operation of an unsecured iPad when you're landing. You know, again, if that iPad flies off your lap and it's on the floor, then you're digging around for it on short final, that's a dangerous situation, as we all know. Another thing to do is just to include the EFB in pre-flight checks. I'll elaborate on this in a bit, but having your data up to date, having your battery charged. There's a number of different ways for an EFB to fail long before you even take off. And then train on the phases of flight in which an iPad will be used. Again, on short final, that's not the best time to be having between trying to figure out different features within ForeFlight as you're barreling toward an airport. So again, if you're a CFI, these are additional considerations to watch for. And one thing I want to mention too is the ACS was recently updated for private pilots. And some of you CFIs and students may notice that now EFBs have been recognized as a viable information source, even as a part of private pilot training. So we're really proud. We met with the FAA this week, and we continue to partner with them to bring ForeFlight and EFBs more and more accepted and used and integrated into FAA rules and regulations. All right, so enhanced flight training with an EFB. So a lot of people ask me, if you're a student, if you're a CFI, or if you're a school, should flight schools incorporate an EFB into training? I would imagine that the items on the right here look very, very familiar to a lot of us when we began our flight training. I only started flight training 7 years ago, but even when I started flight training, I had a paper chart. I had a CFI that was working with me with a plotter, an E6B, and I learned really the fundamentals of flying. And I believe as an instructor and at ForeFlight, we believe that the fundamentals are critical. And you can train on those fundamentals with the iPad off to the side. But we also believe that having an iPad with a student on day one is incredibly important. One thing an EFB does, especially for younger students, is they're really used to technology. And an EFB leads to efficient and enjoyable learning techniques. It really helps students who have a short attention span, they're used to technology, to really adapt to flight training using an EFB. When I was learning cross-country flight planning, my instructor said, this is the point where everybody quits. And I'm not sure if that was great instructing at that point, but he was talking about the arduous nature of building a flight plan using an E6B, plotting out every single turn you're making on a map. Now that was really, really valuable learning, but at the same time, knowing that ForeFlight is there to check your work and to make things ultimately more efficient is something that can be really important to a student when they're learning. Cost savings are a huge important consideration for a student pilot. When you take into account all the money that is spent on paper materials that need to be current, from charts to approach plates to plotters to paper books that can be included in ForeFlight, it's really an incredible savings to have everything purchased digitally and contained within ForeFlight. It's a huge savings. Situational awareness. I know I was using a paper chart when on some of my flights, but I really wish I had ForeFlight with me as well, just as that ultimate safeguard to provide me with the information I need. And probably a huge reason why a student should have ForeFlight on day one is we have an amazing electronic logbook feature. I started a paper logbook based on the recommendation of my instructor and built up many hours that I had to transfer over to my EFB. I'm really happy that I have I do both now, but I'm really happy that I have my information in an EFB in ForeFlight. It makes it easy to prepare IACRA, prepare the different times totals that I need. So really, we really believe that a student should have ForeFlight day one and just start with it and integrate it into their training. So, yes?
Can you transfer that electronic logbook to a spreadsheet so you can easily search for certain things such as tail wheel time?
Yes, you absolutely can. You can export it into a spreadsheet very easily. We also allow you to do some sorting and report making even right within ForeFlight. So simple to complex. This should be a concept that if you're a CFI, you should be very familiar with in terms of teaching. Whenever we teach a student, they're overwhelmed in the cockpit. I was overwhelmed in the cockpit when I was learning my flight training. And if you start barreling through all the extensive features within ForeFlight, it can be very challenging and overwhelming. So if you look on the left there, that's just an airport page. There's an airport page with a METAR and frequencies. And if you show your new student pilot those features and how to access the very simple information, that's a great way to start. In the middle is an airport diagram, or an approach plate. That's more complex. And then finally, when you have your commercial students and your CFIs, then you can be bringing in synthetic vision and layering different windows and using all of our extensive features. But it's a great way to teach. And what I teach my students is I'm always starting with just the easy features in ForeFlight. Tell them that they don't need to know everything else. They'll get to it as appropriate. Storing training documents within ForeFlight. This goes back to that picture I showed you a couple of minutes ago about that poor individual who had all the documents surrounding him. One thing that a lot of people don't know is that right within ForeFlight, you can download, right within ForeFlight, you can download current versions of the major FAA handbooks. The airplane flying handbook is in there, updated. The PHAC is in there. All the advisory circulars. We have a copy of an updated FAR AIM in there. So we really encourage your students and you to go in and use the documents, the FAA documents that are required for training. Right there, the ACS standards are in there. Everything is always updated. So and you can also upload your own. If you're a CFI, you can share lesson plans with your students, avionics manuals and supplements. I use that documents feature. It's very simple to use, and it's a great way just to have all your information at your fingertips. The documents are you can even annotate them right within ForeFlight. So I make notes, I draw on them. Students, I know I have a daughter who turns 20 next week, who's in college. There's never any notes anywhere. She's always annotating books, and she's very, very comfortable with that. And I would say that's common among young student pilots today. Another great thing about ForeFlight is you can explore beyond your region. Again, I'm in the Arizona area, and when I was learning to fly, my sectional was just the Phoenix Tactical Sectional. So that's all I had, and so that was where I trained. And although that's where I was flying, in order to prepare your students for domestic trips, you can go and access nationwide charts right within ForeFlight. So not only are you getting updated charts for your training area, you can look up on the top right there is the Bay Area, which has a very nuanced airspace system. You can pull out and you can look at the areas in Washington, D.C. for restricted areas. You can really use it to Alaska. You can really use it to give your students a really wide breadth of all the different types of charting and training environments they could potentially fly when they're a professional pilot. A great feature within ForeFlight that many of you who have performance may have found is the winds and temps map overlay. This is a great way to teach atmospheric circulation and winds and temperatures aloft. If you go into a map layer on the right there, you can select winds or temps, and you can even zoom out, and that'll show you a huge, it's a little dark. You can zoom out to show you a full globe, and you will see all of the winds and temperature and the temperatures at different flight levels. There's a slider on the right side where you can change the altitude, and as you change the altitude, it's going to show you how the winds will shift visually and graphically in real time. It's a great, great tool. Okay, I alluded to this a little bit earlier. This is in terms of, this goes right back to what the FAA suggests in terms of preparing your EFB for flight. Treat your EFB for flight like a system. We actually have an EFB pre-flight checklist that's built into our checklist tabs, but this is something that you should definitely work in. One way that EFBs are unique compared to almost every other system is that an EFB needs to be pre-flighted at home or while you're on Wi-Fi. So before you even get to the airport, the night before is when the pre-flight of your EFB begins. You need to make sure that you checked your software, that you have the most current version of ForeFlight. We're doing that automatically behind the scenes, but also make sure that you have the current version of iOS. Hugely important, check your battery. I'm a constant user of ForeFlight when I fly, and I've still had times when I have forgotten to make sure that my iPad is charged, or that I'm going on a longer flight and my iPad is leaving its charge. Maybe you can charge on the aircraft, but now I have a backup phone and I've got batteries to make sure that I don't run out of juice. So just really make sure, because again, you'd hate to have a flight encounter some challenges because your EFB runs out of battery. Make sure that you're using current data. If you're doing a flight plan, most of you are familiar with our PAC function. That PAC function is best used when you're on Wi-Fi, because we're going to be downloading all the current weather, all the current NOTAMs and route information specific to your flight. So make sure that you're using that PAC function before you fly while you're on Wi-Fi. And again, another thing, if you're flying with a Sentry device, ADS-B devices, they may require additional checks. They might need to be charged as well. So again, really have the mindset as when you're dealing with ForeFlight, if it's something that you're going to use as a critical tool when you're flying, make sure you pre-flight that as a system before you get in the cockpit, probably the night before, so if things aren't charged up, you can plug them in. Pre-flight with ForeFlight. A lot of you know that you can do this. This is great for students. You can plug a route right into ForeFlight. What's interesting about this is just the route that it's put in, and this is how it would look on your sectional chart. It's just a 2D top-down view of your route. However, with ForeFlight, you can bring up the hazard advisor, and you can see that this route right at the top is actually encountering some terrain. Again, that's something that you wouldn't see easily without really drilling down and understanding your routes. But we provide a really great graphical way of looking at your route and giving you indications on whether or not you're going to be hitting anything. If you're flying across the country or anywhere, you can plan a route. This is a route showing from New York, LA all the way to New York. If you use our globe button, it will give you in performance, it will give you a 3D rendering of your entire flight. It's great to pre-flight visually before you go, give you an idea of terrain, give you an idea of features along the way. A tremendous, tremendous way to preview your flight before you go. I'll take something like this with my students and we'll cast it onto a smart TV and we'll study the route together. This is something that just couldn't be done several years ago before this type of technology.
Where's that tab at?
It is in the flight plan tab. When you're doing a flight plan, if you have performance, it's going to be a globe right there in the middle. So if it's going to be the little globe on performance. So another tab we have, if you have the performance tier, is the ability to study airports in 3D as well. This is one of my favorite features. It will give you a 3D rendering of an airport. If you haven't seen this feature, go visit us over at the Boeing Pavilion downstairs. And we'll show you what the 3D feature looks like. You can basically get a 3D rendering of satellite terrain around an airport that even shows live traffic at that particular time. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can see mountains, you can see obstacles. Whenever I send one of my students, especially on a solo cross country, we're going to look at all the airport environments in 3D before they go. That way they're going to be comfortable when they're approaching that airport on their own. There's a power plant over here, there's a river over here, there's a mountain over here, and we can talk about it. So when they'll have that mental image prior to arriving. I know that when I approached Blythe, Arizona on my cross country, Blythe, Arizona is, I don't know, actually maybe it's Blythe, California. It's on the border between Arizona and California, and it is a flat, featureless area with a few key things in the area that give you an idea of where you are, like a power plant. I remember flying into Blythe really being confused, and had I had ForeFlight before that, I would have known. So that airports in 3D view is a great, great feature for flight training. Annotate maps with training notes. This is something you can even do if you're flying GA. We pair very, very well with an Apple Pencil when we fly. And when you're flying, you can actually make notes on the map. In this case, someone drew a line on their flight plan and wrote ATIS so that they know that when they cross that particular line, that's the reminder, especially for a student pilot, that they need to call the tower and get the weather. Many of you also notice that we're now doing that with alerts as well. We actually have the ATIS frequency pop up. Again, ways just to give you more information in the cockpit at the time that you need it. Something that our power users are using and many flight schools are using is the ability to create map overlays of training areas. So on the left there, I know it's a little bit hard to see, but that is my home. That's the Southwest practice area that is used by 15 or so flight schools flying out of the Phoenix area heading south. All those little pink icons are visual reporting points that all of the schools agree upon that they should use. Some of them are formal VFR reporting points, some of them are not, but this entire overlay is shared among all 15 flight schools so that all the flight schools are using the same information when they're flying. A hugely beneficial situational awareness piece that's critical for training in that region. On the right, that is one of our main customers. That's the University of North Dakota. Anybody have any connection with them? Anybody? All right, very good. We have 2,500 licenses that are being used by UND pilots. Those pilots will get ForeFlight on day one of their training, and we work with them to build a practice area so that all of those pilots can fly into different regions as a map overlay. And so really the sky's the limit on on different map overlays that you have. I've worked with some pilots who are flying into Mexico doing certain types of rescues, and they have mapped out on their own lake beds or roads that are really good for landing that are not charted. So same thing in Alaska with a lot of riverbeds. So really neat ways that you can create custom content right for your iPad, right for ForeFlight. Something else that when your students graduate to instrument training, you can teach holds and traffic patterns electronically. If you go to your flight plan and you select your airport, there's a procedure tab, and within the procedure tab, you can build a hold just like you would be instructed. You know, the fix to hold on, the turns you should make. And when you build that hold based on directions, we can display it graphically right in conjunction with the flight plan. Hugely beneficial for an instrument student that needs to visualize a hold. And not only that, they can use this feature when they're at home and studying. You can give yourself hold instructions, or as a CFI, you can give your student hold instructions, and they can build those holds to see exactly what they look like. One thing I did is when I was learning as an instrument student, I was building my holds incorrectly. And when you try to input an incorrect hold directly into the hold advisor, it's going to draw an incorrect hold, and you go, well, that's not right. So it's a really great visual learning tool instead of scratching out holds on a napkin. Another thing that we do is we have the ability to draw traffic patterns when you fly to an airport. A lot of you, when you fly to an airport, will include in your flight plan just the airport. But if you click on that airport and bring up procedures, you can actually draw in different traffic patterns. The one on the left is that typical 45 entry to the downwind with left traffic that a lot of us have. You can build that right within ForeFlight. You can even build midfield crossover teardrop traffic patterns. Again, if you're teaching a student, sometimes it can be very hard to visualize that, but when you can build it right within ForeFlight, you can see it and then fly it. Hugely beneficial for flight training. Also, what we've really worked on with ForeFlight recently is the ability to debrief using your EFB. Our debrief function is pretty good. Most of you have looked at your flights after you've flown. You get a track log, you get some altitude and speed information, especially if you're flying touch and goes or doing traffic pattern work. You can really get some good information from our track logs that are built right within ForeFlight. So also, as a CFI, we've now worked on our electronic instructor tools. Those of you who are CFIs may have used this feature where you can actually endorse logbooks right within instructor tools. You can now sign off on lessons right within ForeFlight electronically. You can do endorsements. And then all of these are being accepted by the FAA. I've gone to check rides myself with electronically endorsed logbooks, and they've been appreciated for their cleanliness by the DPEs that I've worked with. I mentioned our debrief tools right within ForeFlight now. We've got a great track log, but many of you have heard of Cloud-Ahoy. ForeFlight acquired Cloud-Ahoy about a year ago, and we were very excited to get the Cloud-Ahoy debrief. One of the things that Cloud-Ahoy does is it provides a data-driven post-flight debrief. What we're doing right now is we're looking to really incorporate Cloud-Ahoy more and more into ForeFlight. What Cloud-Ahoy does essentially is it takes a track log and completely gives it tons of additional information that's especially valuable for flight training. A Cloud-Ahoy track log will segment various elements of the flight. It'll segment your steep turn. It'll segment your traffic pattern. It'll even provide graders and grading criteria as part of its CFI assistant. And so it's an unparalleled debrief feature that a student and a CFI can use after their flight to really give them an idea of what their flight looks like. So just to kind of give you some information on where we're going with this is we're really looking to integrate this more and more into ForeFlight specifically. Currently, you can purchase ForeFlight Cloud-Ahoy as separate. You would take your track log from ForeFlight and you would import it into Cloud-Ahoy, and you could see it in that way. But we're really looking for ways in the future to go directly within ForeFlight, potentially a debrief button as something that we're considering, and then having a Cloud-Ahoy debrief like experience right within the app. So again, something that we're really doing to really help the flight training industry just make your training easier, provide the best information out there. So really, so much that you can use an EFB for when you're flight training. It's something that we're extremely proud of. We'll continue to work on it. And a couple of things I want to do before I sign off is just give you some information on how to get in touch with us as you're in your flying careers. Basically, we have, if you're a student or a CFI, you can contact team@foreflight.com. That's our pilot support team. Many of them are here, and they were all pilots and used ForeFlight themselves in their mission. And submit your questions, reach out to us. We'll get back to you as quickly as we can and provide answers to your questions right within ForeFlight. We also have, and this is what I do personally, we also have great solutions for flight schools and universities. This is where a school can purchase ForeFlight licenses in bulk and then issue them to their students like a textbook. The schools can then recoup their costs through like a lab fee or otherwise. But then once you combine these once you combine these licenses together, the school can then push out its documents and its aircraft profiles. It's a wonderful solution. So if you're a flight school and you're interested in that type of solution, you can contact me directly about that. So there's a QR code there that goes directly to our education page. We also have Wings credit, which you can get on the wall right over there. There's 2 QR codes there. But ultimately, on the behalf of ForeFlight, I want to thank you for using ForeFlight. We're really passionate about what we do. We're pilots just like you. We appreciate your feedback. And I hope you have a wonderful Saturday at AirVenture. And thank you for coming to my presentation.